People don't just vanish. Not really. Not from malls, sidewalks, bedrooms, dinner tables. Not in daylight. Not in Jersey. And yet 33 of them did. Teens on a pizza run. Kids on a playground. A businessman on his way to a meeting. All gone. No blood, no noise, no answers. Just keys on counters and cars that drove themselves home. These aren't cold cases. They're heat that never cooled. Glitches in reality wearing human names. And tonight, we're not solving them. We're walking into them, one by one. You might want to leave the light on. Because New Jersey doesn't forget. Before we dive in, if stories like these keep you up at night or make you check the locks twice, hit that subscribe button. We do this often, and it only gets stranger from here. Let us know in the comments. Where are you tuning in from, and what time is it right now? Midnight in Ohio? 3 a.m. in Tokyo? We're watching unexplained vanishings together, after all. Might as well get comfortable. Dulce Maria a la vez. It was a bright Monday afternoon in Bridgeton, New Jersey. The kind of day where shadows are short and nothing feels like it should go wrong. The 16th of September, 2019. The very definition of ordinary. Children scattered across City Park, chasing each other under a sun that looked too clean for a crime. Among them was 5-year-old Dulce Maria Alaves. She wasn't playing alone. Her younger brother was there, and their mother was nearby, sitting in her car, finishing a scratch-off ticket and texting with a friend. In that small sliver of time, those minutes where boredom drapes over everything, the kind of thing happens that's so wrong, your brain takes a few beats too long to believe it's real. Dulce was there. Then she wasn't. Her brother came running back first. He was crying, confused. Mom got out, looked around, called her daughter's name. Nothing. Within 10 minutes, police were on the scene. Within 24 hours, the town had handed out missing posters, like Halloween candy. Within 48, the FBI was in. Witnesses? 1 or 2, maybe. Someone said they saw a man leading a little girl into a red van, but nobody could describe him. Nobody knew who he was. The footage? Patchy, grainy, useless. The park was open, sprawling, with half its security cameras either too far or too broken to offer any clarity. One piece of surveillance showed Dulce alive and playing before she vanished. But after that, static. Then came the search. Massive, expensive, breathless. Law enforcement combed the woods, the streams, the entire park system, cadaver dogs, helicopters, drones. Nothing, no trail, no signs of struggle, no clothing, no shoe, no torn sleeve caught on a fence. It was like Bridgeton had coughed her up and then swallowed her whole. The deeper they dug, the stranger it got. Rumors turned acidic. Whispers about the mother too calm, they said. Not crying enough. Why did she stay in the car? Was it a setup? Did she know the abductor? All the questions that usually follow a family not broken in the correct way. Police questioned her for hours. No charges, no timeline inconsistencies, just pain and a blank space where a child used to be. Then came the letters, anonymous ones, claiming Dulce had been taken by someone close, that she was alive, that she was in another country, Mexico, maybe, or not. The letters were never verified, the claims never confirmed, just more noise, stacking like dust on an already silent case. Every few months, the authorities would drop another age-progressed photo. Here's what Dulce might look like at 6, at 7, at 8. Each one less comforting than the last photoshopped hope held together by guesswork and algorithms. There's still a reward. $75,000, if you're counting. But what's a reward for something that might have slipped dimensions? The town keeps her memory alive. Vigils, balloons, memorials made of flowers and chalk drawings on cracked sidewalks. And every year, when September rolls back around, there's that same question. How does a little girl disappear in broad daylight in a public park and leave behind exactly nothing? Some say it was a stranger abduction, the textbook kind. Others say it was someone she knew, a quiet exchange, a lure, candy, a promise, a whisper. Something that didn't look wrong until it was too late. Then there are those who believe it wasn't a person at all. That sometimes, very rarely, but just often enough to keep you awake, the world glitches. Something opens. A seam, a rip, a fold in the ordinary, and someone like Dulce falls through. And if that sounds ridiculous, well, so does a 5-year-old vanishing in broad daylight in front of witnesses, near her mother, within shouting distance of strangers, with zero trace. It's the kind of case that makes you look over your shoulder even in safe places, especially in safe places. But let's say you write it off a one-time horror, some cruel stroke of cosmic bad luck, a statistical anomaly. Then you look back, 4 decades, to a pizza run in Newark, 5 boys, broad daylight, all gone. You begin to wonder, what's wrong with New Jersey? Alvin Turner, 15. It was the 20th of August, 1978. A late summer Sunday in Newark, New Jersey. One of those sticky urban days when the sidewalks felt hot enough to bubble, and the only logical answer to everything was to grab pizza with your friends and disappear for a while into noise, grease, and melted cheese. That's what Alvin Turner set out to do that afternoon. He was 15, hungry, and in good company. He left his house on Clinton Avenue with 4 other boys, Randy Johnson, Michael McDowell, Melvin Pittman, and Ernest Taylor. They were all friends, all neighborhood kids, normal, average, forgettable in the way only teenagers can be when life hasn't yet carved them into people adults notice. And then they were gone. All 5 of them. At once. Like someone hit mute on a whole group of lives. That was the last confirmed sighting of any of them. Walking down Clinton Avenue together. Nobody's entirely sure if they made it to the pizzeria. There's no receipt, no camera footage, no suspicious man in a trench coat lurking behind the counter, no final conversation, no clues. In the early days, the assumptions were simple, if callous. Teenage boys go missing, they must have run away. Maybe they hopped a bus. Maybe they were hiding out at a friend's place. Police shrugged. Parents pleaded. The media yawned. 5 black teenagers vanishing in a rough Newark neighborhood wasn't exactly front-page news in the late 72nd. If you squint hard enough, a pattern starts to form, the kind that tells you who gets urgency and who gets excuses. But the parents knew, especially Alvin Turner's mother. Her son didn't just wander off. He had plans. He had family. He had no money, no bag, no note, and most of all, he wasn't alone. And that's the part that never stopped stinging. 5 boys, together. Not 1, not 2, all 5. Disappearing in sync like some cruel magic trick. The math doesn't work. Statistically, when multiple people go missing together, at least one resurfaces, makes a call, sends a letter, gets cold feet, and turns up 2 states over. But this time, no such comfort. Just 5 silhouettes erased from the sidewalk. The case slowly calcified over the years. Occasionally, a detective would dust it off. Rumors surfaced, stories of a reclusive handyman, whispers of basements, of a building that had been demolished too soon. One name kept coming up, Lee Anthony Evans. In 2010, 32 years after the boys vanished, he was charged with their murders. The theory? That Evans and an accomplice lured the boys into an abandoned house, locked them inside, and burned it down. No bodies were found, no physical evidence, just a confession from the supposed accomplice, who later recanted. Evans represented himself in court, cool, calm, almost unnervingly still. He said the story was a lie, that the confession was fiction, that he had nothing to do with it, and in the end, the jury agreed. Acquitted, walked free. So that theory, horrific and unsatisfying as it already was, folded in on itself. The only explanation anyone had was thrown out, leaving behind a case that was somehow emptier than before. Alvin Turner's mother, Evelyn, spent the next decades fighting to keep the boys' names alive. She made phone calls, gave interviews, wrote letters to governors, Saturday through meetings, waited on callbacks that never came. She died in 2008 without knowing what happened to her son. The FBI eventually got involved, albeit late and lightly. Tips trickled in, someone claimed to see Alvin in Georgia, another said one of the boys had ended up in the Caribbean. All were dead ends. None verifiable. And what do you do with a case that has no ending, no beginning, no middle, no bones, no notes, no sightings, no suspects, just a hole in the timeline? The Clinton Avenue 5 have become urban legend in Newark, a story locals know, but the rest of the country doesn't staff. Not because it's too strange, because it's too familiar. Too much like other stories people are tired of hearing. A group of kids disappears, nobody listens, time marches on. In many ways, Alvin Turner is the ghost you never knew was walking next to you. He had a face, a voice, a dream, probably a bad haircut. He probably laughed too loud and thought pizza could fix anything. He was just 15. And maybe, if it had only been Alvin, just Alvin, this story would feel different. But he wasn't alone. Because Randy was right next to him. And Randy never came home either. If you're still here after that, good. You're exactly the kind of person we make these for. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps us keep digging into the stories that don't like being found. And while you're here, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Are you alone in your room at 2 a.m., commuting through fog at dawn? Just curious who else is wandering through the dark with us. Randy Johnson, 16. Randy Johnson was 16 when he disappeared. 16. That age where the world feels both impossibly large and somehow already too small. Where you're old enough to start noticing how the system works, but too young to be able to do anything about it. And on the 20th of August, 1978, Randy left his home in Newark, New Jersey, and walked down Clinton Avenue with 4 of his closest friends, expecting nothing more than a few slices of pizza and a lazy Sunday evening. He was never seen again. Randy wasn't the loud one in the group, not the leader, not the follower either. According to classmates, he was quiet, but funny. The kind of kid who had a lot of thoughts, but wasn't in a rush to share them unless you asked. He lived with his family in a small house, kept his head down, went to school, no trouble, no enemies. No strange behavior leading up to that day. He just went out with his friends and vanished. There's something particularly cruel about this kind of silence. The silence that follows a vanishing with no aftermath. No wreckage, no evidence, no narrative to pull apart. With Randy, there's not even a footprint after the date. Not a rumor he went south, not a friend who got a call, not even a classmate with a weird memory that might be useful. It's as though he simply walked into a blank space and never walked back out. The Clinton Avenue 5 became one of those cautionary tales kids grow up hearing about in Newark. You don't wander too far. You stay in a group, though, clearly. Even that wasn't enough. Parents used the story as a warning. Teachers used it as an example. Cops used it as a reference point when new cases came up. But the further away the year 1978 got, the more that story became folklore. And in folklore, people become blurry. Statistics, ghosts, a single headline recycled every 5 years. But Randy wasn't a headline. He was someone's son. He was part of a group of 5, but he was still a single, specific human being who had a life before the mystery swallowed him. The problem with vanishing in a group is that you get flattened. You become one of the 5. Your name gets listed in the same sentence, over and over. Alvin, Randy, Michael, Melvin, Ernest. They might as well be one person in the public imagination. But behind every name, there was a bedroom, a favorite song, a secret, a fear, a reason to come home. And Randy had people waiting for him to come home. His mother, in particular, never let the case go. She didn't have much help, not from local law enforcement, not from the national media. Black teenagers disappearing in poor neighborhoods just didn't have the same national currency in 1978 as, say, a suburban girl going missing. Even now, you could Google his name and come up with more silence than substance. There's something eerily modern about Randy's disappearance. It echoes the kinds of stories that make headlines now. A group goes missing, law enforcement hesitates, families organize vigils, the public grows frustrated. But Randy's case happened before social media, before viral posts, before any kind of public pressure could build in real time. His family shouted into the void, and the void stayed quiet. Over the years, there were theories, always theories. Some said the boys ran into the wrong person, someone they knew, someone they trusted. Others blamed gang activity, even though none of the 5 had records or known affiliations. Still others floated the idea that the house they were allegedly lured to had been demolished, taking any evidence with it. That theory led, eventually, to the infamous 2010 charges against Lee Evans. And while Randy's family held their breath during the trial, hoping for something like closure, what they got was an acquittal and a door slammed shut. But if closure was impossible, remembrance was not. Some years later, a mural went up in Newark, a painting of the 5 boys, their young faces frozen in time. Randy's was there, 2 captured in a likeness drawn from an old-school photo. In the mural, he looks almost too young, like someone trying to look serious for a photo but thinking about something funny at the last second. The mural didn't bring answers, but it brought visibility, if only local, if only temporary. People driving by would slow down, stare at the faces, and ask themselves, how could 5 boys just disappear? And the real answer is, we still don't know. Every angle has been turned over, every theory has been aired out, every hope has been exhausted. But the story remains precisely where it began. 5 boys, including Randy Johnson, walked down Clinton Avenue one Sunday and never returned. Which brings us to Michael, 16 years old, one of Randy's closest friends. They were side by side that day. And like Randy, Michael McDowell never came back. Michael McDowell, 16. Michael McDowell was 16 years old when he left his home in Newark on the afternoon of the 20th of August, 1978. 16, that liminal space between boy and man, where the world starts asking you for answers you're still too young to give. That Sunday, Michael didn't have anything extraordinary planned. Just a pizza run with his friends. Alvin Turner, Randy Johnson, Melvin Pittman, Ernest Taylor. 5 boys who'd grown up navigating the cracked sidewalks of Clinton Avenue, who knew which corners to avoid and which stores would let you hang around even if you didn't buy anything. They were regulars, known in the neighborhood, the kind of kids who left footprints and fingerprints all over a city that mostly ignored them until the day it couldn't. That day, they disappeared. Michael wasn't the kind of kid who drew attention. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't a troublemaker. He was reliable, showed up to school, helped his younger siblings, made it home by curfew. He liked basketball, had a quiet sense of humor, and kept his circle tight, which made his sudden vanishing alongside his closest friends all the more absurd. No fight, no falling out, no argument with anyone. Just a normal day that never got its evening. What's unsettling about Michael's story is how little of it exists. His name shows up in lists, in group references, in retrospective articles about the Clinton Avenue 5. But there are no long features about his personality, no detailed breakdowns of his last known steps. His life is preserved only in the negative space of his absence. Some of that is the result of time. The deeper into the past a case drifts, the more details get lost, filtered through fading memories and inconsistent records. but some of it is structural. Michael was a black teenager from a low-income neighborhood, and in 1978, that meant your disappearance wasn't news, it was background noise. Law enforcement was slow to act. The press was slower to care, and while his family never stopped looking for answers, they were doing it without the support that often comes standard in more high-profile missing persons cases. Michael's mother reported him missing within hours. She called friends, walked the blocks herself, retraced the likely route to the pizza place. No one had seen him. Not after that moment on Clinton Avenue when the 5 boys were last spotted walking together. It was like the city had blinked just once and erased them. Over the years, police floated different theories, some more plausible than others. A few neighbors reported seeing the group enter an abandoned house on the west side of town, the same house later linked to the Lee Evans theory. That house, unfortunately, no longer exists. Demolished long before for unrelated reasons, it took whatever secrets it held with it. In 2010, when Evans was charged with the murder of the boys, including Michael, there was a flicker of something like resolution. But the prosecution's case leaned heavily on an uncorroborated confession from an alleged accomplice who changed his story more than once. There was no physical evidence, no remains, no forensic trail, and no way to prove that Michael or any of the others had even been in that house. Evans was acquitted. And with that verdict, the case collapsed back into the same empty space it had always occupied. A hollow with 5 names echoing inside. Michael's siblings, those still living, have spoken rarely, and when they do, it's with that blend of practiced grief and quiet fury. It's not just the loss, it's the erasure. The way their brother's name exists only in connection to a group, rarely alone, rarely remembered for who he was, only for how he vanished. In the decades since, Newark has changed. The city's skyline looks different, its neighborhoods gentrified or decayed in turn, but Clinton Avenue still holds shadows. The people who were around then, the ones who remember that weekend in 2078, they still talk about the boys. And every so often, when the wind hits just right, or a certain kind of silence falls over the block, it's like you can still feel Michael's presence. Like he's still on his way back from that pizza run, just running a little late. Michael's story, or what little we have of it, is a reminder of how absence can be louder than presence. He didn't make headlines in life, and he barely made them in death or whatever came in place of it. But his name is still spoken, still written, still hanging in the air, like a question that no one's been able to answer for nearly half a century. And then there was Melvin Pittman, 17, the oldest of the group. If there was a leader that day, it might have been him. But leadership didn't protect him either. Melvin Pittman, 17. 17. Old enough to be taken seriously, too young to know what that even means. That was Melvin Pittman on the 20th of August, 1978, the oldest of the Clinton Avenue 5, and, by default, the one most likely to be listened to. He wasn't just part of the group, he was the one with the deep voice, the strong shoulders, the reputation for keeping his head when others didn't. If the 5 boys had a natural leader, it was Melvin. He had plans, not vague teenage someday plans, but real ones. He wanted to graduate, get a job, maybe save up for a car. A full-time job was waiting for him that fall, and if you'd asked the people who knew him best, they would have told you Melvin wasn't the kind of kid who drifted. He was rooted, steady. The kind of guy who walked his younger siblings to school, who helped his mother without being asked, who always made sure to call home if he was going to be late. On that Sunday afternoon, he left the house without much ceremony, said he was going out with the guys. They were grabbing some food, maybe just hanging out a while. He'd be back before dark. But the sun went down, and Melvin never came home. At first, his family thought maybe there'd been a mix-up. Maybe the boys had gone to someone's house. maybe Melvin had stayed out later than he meant to. But as the hours passed, those explanations collapsed one by one. He wasn't at a friend's place. He wasn't answering calls. No one had seen him. No one had heard from any of them. And just like that, a family that thought they were living a normal Sunday evening found themselves hurled into the center of something inexplicable. Melvin's disappearance wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was absorbed into the collective silence that followed the Clinton Avenue Five's vanishing. But for his family, the pain was individual, specific. His mother never stopped calling the precinct. His older brother knocked on doors himself, asking neighbors if they'd seen anything. His father, stoic and silent, began walking the streets every evening, retracing routes, watching windows, looking for any detail that might have been missed. They clung to the belief that if they just worked harder, searched longer, shouted louder, someone would listen. But in 1978, Newark didn't listen to families like Melvin's, not for long. The first week passed with little police activity, just a couple of statements taken, a brief search of the area. There were no Amber Alerts back then, no statewide mobilizations, no social media to amplify the urgency, no press conferences with firm-jawed sheriffs assuring the public that every lead is being followed. The authorities chalked it up to a group of boys who had likely run off. Maybe they were in trouble. Maybe they didn't want to be found. The Pittmans knew better. Melvin wasn't running from anything. He had responsibilities. He had a future, and he had no reason to vanish without a trace. The few details that did trickle in only made things stranger. A local said he'd seen the boys being led into an abandoned building. Another claimed to have heard voices coming from a condemned house on the block. Years later, when the building was linked to a suspect, Lee Evans, the theory emerged that something had happened there. Something terrible. But that building had long since been reduced to rubble. The wreckage was cleared, the lot paved over, and with it, any hope of finding physical answers. The Evans trial in 2010 briefly rekindled the fire. Melvin's name resurfaced in news articles. His face frozen in a high school photo appeared on television screens, but there were no breakthroughs. No forensic smoking gun. The trial ended in acquittal, and the silence returned, heavier than before. Melvin's family aged into grief. His younger siblings grew up with a brother-shaped gap in their memory. His parents eventually passed without answers. And the city moved on, as cities do, rebranding, rebuilding, trying to polish the rough edges of its history. But some parts of a city never get polished. Some corners always stay just a little colder. Even now, if you walk down Clinton Avenue, there are people who remember. People who saw the flyers, who knew the boys, who still pause when they pass the mural with 5 faces painted in eternal adolescence. Melvin Pittman was more than a missing person. He was a symbol not by choice, but by consequence. A reminder of how easily lives can be forgotten when they don't fit the narrative. How entire futures can be swallowed without explanation. And how a teenager with dreams can become a mystery with no beginning and no end. And yet, there was still one more. The youngest in the group, just 15. His name was Ernest Taylor. And like the others, he stepped into that Sunday afternoon expecting nothing out of the ordinary and was never seen again. Ernest Taylor, 15. 15 years old, the baby of the group. That was Ernest Taylor, on the day he vanished, the 20th of August, 1978, walking down Clinton Avenue in Newark with 4 older boys who, in that moment, might as well have been brothers. Ernest didn't have much, not by the city's standards, not by anyone's, pan. But what he did have, he held close. Friends, family, a corner of the world where he was known. In a neighborhood that could swallow you whole if you weren't careful, Ernest had found his place. And then he didn't come home. The youngest of the Clinton Avenue Five, Ernest was the one everyone remembers for his quiet warmth. Not loud, not reckless, not showy, just present, steady. The kind of kid who offered half his sandwich without being asked. His teachers called him polite. His cousins called him dependable. His mother called him a good boy, one who didn't like to stay out too late and didn't like to leave people behind. And that, maybe, was what hurt the most. If anything had gone wrong that day, the Ernest his family knew wouldn't have run. He would have stayed, helped, waited. But nobody waited for Ernest. Not really. Not in the way that counts. When his mother first called the police that night to report him missing, she was met with hesitation, a pause on the other end of the line. Then the usual question, "Are you sure he's not just out with friends?" Followed by, "They're probably just blowing off steam. Boys do that." And then the most familiar response of all, "Give it 48 hours. 48 hours. That's a long time to give a ghost a head start." And what made it worse, unbearably, absurdly worse, was that she wasn't just reporting one boy missing. She was one of 5 mothers making the same calls. 5 mothers in the same neighborhood, reporting 5 boys missing on the same day, from the same street. That should have lit a fire, should have triggered protocol, should have set off sirens. It didn't. Instead, it triggered skepticism, shrugs, shrinking headlines, the quiet, systemic implication that maybe these boys weren't worth the full weight of the response. Maybe they brought it on themselves. Maybe they were somewhere they shouldn't have been. But Ernest wasn't supposed to vanish. None of them were. But especially not him. He was 15. He still had the kind of face that people smile at on reflex. He hadn't even finished growing. Years passed. Tips came in, and just as quickly, were ruled out. A few locals whispered that the boys had gotten caught up in something bigger than they understood, that they'd seen something they weren't supposed to, or followed someone they trusted a little too far. Some said the building on Camden Street held the answers, the one that was later tied to Lee Evans, the suspect charged and acquitted decades later. But by the time the authorities took a real look, that building was dust and memory. Whatever secrets it held had been bulldozed into the ground and carted off with the rest of the city's forgotten architecture. The alleged confession that formed the backbone of the prosecution was shaky, and without physical evidence, there was no closure to be had. Not for the jury, not for the families, not for Ernest. His name never left his mother's lips, though her voice changed over the years. At first, it was full of fight. She called reporters, picketed City Hall, marched with the other parents. But over time, the fight changed shape. It turned inward, into something quieter. The kind of grief that doesn't shout anymore but sits with you at the dinner table long after everyone else is gone. She kept his room intact for years. The posters on the wall faded. The clothes in the drawer started to smell like time. His school books collected dust. And yet, nothing in that room ever felt as empty as the rest of the house. Sometimes, a tragedy gets smaller the more people you add to it. The human brain can only hold so much sorrow before it starts condensing it into something abstract. 5 boys missing? That's a headline. 1 boy missing? That's a story. Ernest deserved a story. He was a 15-year-old with no criminal record, no history of running away, no enemies, no trail. Just a soft-spoken teenager who wanted pizza with his friends and never came back. In another life, the one that wasn't taken from him, he might have been a coach, or a mechanic, or a father. He might have stayed in Newark, or left and sent postcards home. We don't know. We'll never know. Because whatever future Ernest Taylor had ended somewhere on that walk down Clinton Avenue. 5 boys. No answers, no remains, no sense. Just an open wound in the middle of a city that doesn't bleed the same way anymore. And yet, if you think that was the last time New Jersey watched a young boy walk away and vanish without explanation, you'd be wrong. Because just a few years earlier, in a different part of the state, another disappearance would ripple through the decades. 2 boys walking away from a school and stepping into a mystery that has never come back out. Stephen Anderson, 17. It was the 7th of April, 1975, 3 years before the Clinton Avenue 5 would disappear. But already, New Jersey had begun collecting the kind of vanishings that don't just unsettle a town, but erode its memory. This time, it wasn't a city street or a pizza run. It was something quieter, more institutional, and somehow even more slippery. 17-year-old Stephen Anderson was living at the New Lisbon State School in Pemberton Township, a sprawling, wooded facility originally designed for individuals with developmental disabilities. That spring morning, he left the school grounds on foot with another boy named David Williams. Neither of them was ever seen again. Stephen wasn't just a name on a report. He was a person suspended somewhere between system and self. 17 years old, tall for his age, smart in the quiet way. He was the kind of kid who kept to himself but paid attention to everything. And yet, by the time his name appeared in official reports, he was already reduced to a file, a resident, a missing ward. Another kid in a state-run facility who vanished without anyone quite realizing when or how. There were no cameras, no witnesses worth quoting, no frantic 911 call, just two boys who were there one moment and not the next. Stephen and David weren't exactly escape artists. The grounds of the New Lisbon facility weren't prison walls, more like an open-ended maze of staff cottages, dormitories, dusty trails, and wooded patches. Back then, it wasn't uncommon for residents to wander. Sometimes they'd leave for a walk and come back before curfew. Sometimes they wouldn't. And the problem with a facility like that, designed for people society didn't quite know what to do with, is that the line between freedom and neglect was blurry from the start. By the time anyone raised the alarm, hours had passed, valuable hours. The kind that get filled with assumptions. They'll come back. They're just cooling off. They've done this before. Those were the responses that might have been whispered in break rooms and logged in reports. Meanwhile, the trail went cold before anyone ever thought to follow it. The official record is sparse. Stephen and David walked off the property together sometime in the afternoon. No known conflicts, no note, no signs of a plan. Just two boys who left, perhaps curious, perhaps frustrated, perhaps just looking for something that didn't look like confinement. And then, nothing. The woods around the facility were searched. Helicopters were dispatched eventually. Ground teams combed the area for days. But it was spring, and the undergrowth was thick. Trees bled into trees. Streams ran shallow and fast. Every stick and footprint blurred into the next. No clothing was found, no scent trails, no discarded items, no sightings in nearby towns. It was like the forest had folded over behind them. In the years that followed, rumors flared like matchsticks, short-lived and mostly smoke. Some staff thought the boys had made it to a highway and hitched a ride. Others speculated they'd tried to cross the nearby Rancocas Creek and drowned. No bodies ever turned up, not downstream, not in the brush, not anywhere. The records, such as they were, stopped updating after a few years, just two names suspended in unresolved status. The problem with institutional disappearances is that they get cataloged, not remembered. Stephen's family, what little of it remained involved in his life, pushed for answers. But the deeper they went, the more bureaucratic the mystery became. Files misplaced, staff retired, policies shifted. Over time, Stephen became less a person than a paperwork problem, a case number with no resolution, living in a manila folder that no one really wanted to open. The missing persons system didn't serve him well either. There were no age-progressed sketches for Stephen until decades later. His case was often misfiled, bundled incorrectly with runaways or administrative errors. For a long time, it wasn't even clear who was actively assigned to investigate it. The silence wasn't just frustrating, it was procedural. By the early 2002, investigators would occasionally revisit the case. A cold case detective here, a curious reporter there. But each time they reached back, the information was thinner, the witnesses older, the facility more changed. The original grounds had been partially repurposed, The buildings remodeled, the staff long gone. The trail had not only gone cold, it had been paved over. Steven Anderson's disappearance is the kind that slips through the cracks, not because it's unsolvable, but because it's too ordinary in all the wrong ways. He wasn't abducted from a shopping mall. There were no tire tracks, no screams, no ransom notes. Just a quiet exit from a forgotten institution on an ordinary afternoon. He wasn't famous. He didn't go viral. His face didn't haunt milk cartons or primetime specials. But his story never really ended, which means it's still happening. And so is David Sendel. Because Steven didn't leave alone. David Williams walked out beside him that same day. And the trail he left behind was just as invisible. Still with us? 7 disappearances in, and we're barely scratching the surface. If your curiosity's as restless as ours, make sure you're subscribed. It's the only way to stay tethered as we go deeper. And since you're already down this rabbit hole, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Midnight? Noon? Somewhere in between? Just trying to track who else is pacing through the strange with us. David Williams, ND1. 12 years old. That's all David Williams was when he vanished 12. The age where the world is still bigger than your fears and your dreams haven't yet been edited by reality. On the 7th of April, 1975, David left the grounds of the New Lisbon State School in Pemberton Township, New Jersey, alongside 17-year-old Steven Anderson. And then, just like that, nothing. 2 boys, one quiet afternoon, gone. David's story is like a piece of paper that someone folded in half decades ago and then forgot inside a drawer. He had a face, a smile, a voice. But over time, all that's left is the fold, the sharp crease in the narrative where everything stopped making sense. He'd been placed in the New Lisbon State School, a state-run facility that, in 1975, served as both refuge and repository. Originally designed for individuals with developmental disabilities, it often became a catch-all for kids who fell through the cracks of families, schools, or systems that didn't know what to do with them. David wasn't violent, he wasn't disruptive, he wasn't dangerous, but he had challenges. Challenges that, in the 1972nd, were rarely met with resources and rarely explained with patience. Still, David was more than his diagnosis. He was quick-witted, playful, and instinctively kind. The kind of kid who tugged your sleeve instead of calling your name, who smiled with his whole face, who remembered birthdays but forgot to tie his shoes. He had a soft spot for animals and a tendency to trail behind during walks, not because he was slow, but because he was curious. Everything was worth stopping for. Every rock, every leaf, every crack in the sidewalk. On the 7th of April, he left the facility with Steven Anderson. How planned it was, no one knows. There were no reports of arguments, no signs of distress. Some believe they simply wandered, maybe looking for adventure, maybe just trying to find something that felt more like freedom. But what they found instead was the edge of a mystery that's never closed. When staff finally noticed their absence, hours had already passed. The initial reaction was muted. These weren't inmates escaping from a prison. They were residents, and occasional wandering wasn't unheard of. But this time, they didn't come back. That night, the temperature dropped. The woods around New Lisbon grew dark. And David, who had never spent a night outside alone, was out there somewhere with or without Steven. No one could say for sure. Search efforts ramped up. Dogs, volunteers, local law enforcement, flyers, helicopters, the usual tools of urgency. But there was a delay, those first few hours lost to assumptions, to institutional routine, to disbelief, and that delay cost them. The trails had gone cold before anyone bothered to follow them. Some investigators suspected the boys had tried to reach the nearby Rancocas Creek. Theories ranged from accidental drowning to possible abduction to simply getting lost in the woods. But there was no debris, no shoes, no scraps of clothing, no sign of any struggle or shelter, just silence. David's family didn't take that silence well. His mother in particular fought for visibility. But in the 1972nd, missing children, especially children with disabilities, didn't make the evening news unless there was something sensational to exploit. And David's story didn't have shock value, no blood, no ransom, just absence. The case slipped between the gears. With no clear crime scene, no credible sightings, and no digital infrastructure to keep the momentum alive, David's name began to vanish from public consciousness. And because he disappeared in the company of Steven Anderson, older, less vulnerable, and equally forgotten, their cases were often bundled together, reducing David to an afterthought in his own story. It wasn't until years later that investigators began to separate the boys again, examining their paths as individual lives instead of one shared tragedy. But by then, most of the records were dusty. Most of the staff who worked at New Lisbon in the 1972nd had moved on, and the forest? It had grown back, thick and unapologetic, as if nothing had ever passed through it. There were brief moments of hope, a sighting in a nearby town that turned out to be false, a tip from a former employee that led nowhere, a construction project that uncovered bones animal, not human. Each time, David's name surfaced for a few days, then sank again, as if even his ghost was getting tired of waiting. In the early 2002nd, age-progressed renderings were finally released. They showed what David might have looked like as an adult, though imagining adulthood for someone frozen at 12 is always a strange, unsettling thing. His eyes, digitally matured, stared out from posters placed in bus terminals and on the walls of police precincts. But time, as always, had the last word. The leads dried up, the funding stopped. The files went back into storage, and David's story remained unfinished. New Jersey has its fair share of cold cases. Some are dramatic, some are tangled in scandal. But David's is different. His is quiet. Almost too quiet. A boy who was already misunderstood in life, and then quietly erased in disappearance. And yet, long before the term Amber Alert became standard, and decades before the phrase child predator took over headlines, David was already gone. One of the first, one of the lost, but not the last. Because just a year before David vanished, another child disappeared, this time, a 4-year-old girl in Burlington, on her way to a babysitting job she never reached. And this one left behind a voice. Margaret Ellen Fox, 14. The 24th of June, 1974, Burlington, New Jersey. A cloudless Monday, so ordinary it felt scripted. The kind of day that gets folded into calendars without fanfare, except that this one never got folded. Because on this day, 4-year-old Margaret Ellen Fox left home with a purse, a notebook, and the kind of optimism only a teenager headed to her first babysitting job could carry. She walked out the door, told her family she'd be back later, and simply never returned. She'd been excited, nervous, maybe, but eager. It was a job she'd found through the classified section of the local paper. A man named John Marshall had called the Fox residence a few days earlier, offering a steady gig watching his 5-year-old son. Margaret had written everything down in her notebook, like a miniature professional. The address he gave her, his phone number, even what bus to take to get to the meeting point. Her parents, cautious but trusting, allowed her to go. It was 1974. Kids walked to jobs. They navigated buses. They answered ads. It was a different time. They say, though, time is always different until something goes wrong. She was last seen at the corner of High and West Broad Streets, waiting near the bus stop where she'd arranged to meet John. Witnesses say she was wearing a light blue, long-sleeved blouse, a black and white checkered jacket, blue jeans, and brown sandals. She was carrying a purse that had her name embroidered on it. People saw her. She was real. Then she was gone. Hours passed. Her parents began to worry. They called the number she'd been given, the one for John Marshall, but it rang endlessly. Finally, someone picked up. A man. Calm, cool, almost bored. "Margaret's not here," he said, and hung up. Police were contacted. A missing persons report was filed. And for once, they didn't wait. Margaret was 14, but something about the setup, the classified ad, the strange phone call, the flat voice on the other end felt wrong. Burlington wasn't Newark. A teenage girl vanishing in broad daylight got attention. Investigators moved fast. They traced the number to a payphone booth in a nearby town, but the trail ended there. And then, almost as suddenly, the case dropped into an entirely different realm. A ransom call. It came just days after she vanished. A voice on the line, male, slow, methodical. He told the Fox family they needed to pay $10,000 for Margaret's return. His tone was cold, mechanical, no panic, no urgency, just instructions. And then, at the end of the call, something strange. He said, $10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topping. And that was it. The line went dead. No second call, no place to send the money, no follow-up demands, just that one surreal phrase, delivered like a riddle or a dare. The recording was saved. For decades, the FBI would use it, releasing snippets to the public, hoping someone would recognize the voice, but it never led anywhere definitive. The call had all the markings of a hoax except for one cruel detail. It referenced Margaret by name. Whoever it was, they knew something. Over the years, dozens of theories bloomed and wilted. Some believed the ad was placed by a serial predator. Others thought the call was a distraction, meant to muddy the timeline and stall the investigation. There were leads that pointed toward the Pine Barrens, to abandoned cabins, to known drifters who passed through the area. There were psychics, amateur sleuths, even a few confessions, all debunked. Still, Margaret remained missing. In the decades that followed, her parents never stopped waiting. Birthdays came and went, holidays passed. Her younger siblings grew up, started families, but Margaret stayed 14. Forever waiting at that bus stop, forever walking into a job interview that never existed. And what makes her case feel particularly surreal is how analog it is. The entire mystery is built from artifacts of a different age. A newspaper ad, a payphone, a pocket notebook, a ransom call on tape. There's no surveillance footage, no cell phone records, no digital trail. If it happened today, someone would have had a Snapchat location. A Ring camera might have caught her walking. Cell towers would have triangulated the final call. But in 1974, all you got was her handwriting and a voice on tape. And that voice still lingers. Every few years, the FBI releases the audio again, hoping that modern ears might catch something the old ones didn't. $10,000 might be a lot of bread. It plays like a scratched vinyl, eerie, casual, utterly detached. It doesn't feel like a man trying to negotiate. It feels like a man practicing a line for a movie no one wanted to watch. In 2019, 45 years after her disappearance, investigators released age-progressed images of what Margaret might look like in her 52nd. They re-released the audio. They offered a reward. But the leads had thinned into memory by then. The air around the case had grown too still. And yet, Margaret's story refuses to fade. Maybe because it isn't just a missing person case, it's a moment suspended in time. A girl, stepping out into the world for the first time. A voice, whispering from the other end of a dead phone line. A puzzle missing too many pieces. If you stand long enough at that intersection in Burlington, some swear you can still feel it, that lingering pause in the air where something went off script, where a straight line twisted into a question mark. And just when you think it couldn't get stranger, Another name surfaces, one that starts off completely ordinary. A 1-year-old man from Clifton, an adult, this time, disappears after leaving for a short drive. And his car? That one does show up, but it's parked hundreds of miles away, in a place no one expected. Hakan Karakai, 31. The 24th of September, 1999, Clifton, New Jersey. A Friday afternoon that didn't start strange. The weather was fair. Traffic was normal. Life, by most definitions, was operating as expected. 31-year-old Hakan Karakai was headed out for a quick drive. That's what he told his family. Just a short trip, no suitcase. No plans, no final words that felt final. And yet, by nightfall, he had vanished from the face of the earth. Hakan was a Turkish-American businessman with a life that, to all appearances, had settled into a stable rhythm. He worked in New Jersey's logistics and shipping sector, a line of work where long hours and unpredictable schedules were normal. He was responsible, well-liked, and meticulous. He paid his bills on time, kept up with relatives, and didn't miss appointments. He wasn't the type to disappear, not even temporarily. And yet, by the next morning, that's exactly what he had done. When he didn't return home that evening, his family wasn't immediately panicked. Maybe he had stopped to visit someone. Maybe he ran an errand. Maybe the traffic had been worse than expected. But when the hours passed and his phone went unanswered, the tension settled in. By the next day, it had crystallized into dread. They filed a missing persons report and began making calls of their own. Hakan had last been seen leaving his residence in Clifton around 2 p.m. He was driving his silver Toyota Camry. There were no signs of distress, no argument, no strange behavior. Just a man, his car, and an errand he never returned from. Then, a few days later, a break, or what seemed like one, Hakan's car was found. Not in Clifton, not even in New Jersey. It was located hundreds of miles away, deep in the Adirondack Mountains of New York, near the Canadian border. Parked, abandoned, not wrecked, not vandalized, just sitting there, tucked quietly in a remote lot as if someone had placed it down and walked away. The location made no sense. Hakan had no known ties to the area, no friends there, no business dealings. His passport was at home, his wallet too. No luggage in the trunk. The keys were gone. So was he. Local authorities searched the nearby wilderness. The area where the car was found was remote, heavily forested, and threaded with hiking trails and hidden lakes. It was not the kind of place you stumbled into accidentally. You had to know where you were going, or think you did. Helicopters scanned the tree canopy. Dogs combed the underbrush. Park rangers, state police, and volunteers walked gridded patterns through the terrain for days, but there was nothing. No clothing. No tracks. No signs of a struggle. Hakan Karakai had entered the Adirondacks, or at least his car had, but left no evidence behind. One theory was that he had chosen to vanish, that something in his life, stress, disillusionment, secrets, had compelled him to walk away. But there was no real evidence for that, no suspicious financial moves, no behavior that pointed toward planning, no goodbye messages, and most of all, no trail. Another theory was that foul play was involved, that someone had taken him somewhere between Clifton and the Adirondacks. But again, no physical evidence, no witnesses, no surveillance. The distance between the two locations only deepened the mystery. It would have taken at least 5 hours to make that drive, longer if you avoided major highways. Why would anyone bring him there? Why leave the car so neatly, so intact? Investigators explored the possibility of international ties. Hakan had extended family in Turkey. He spoke multiple languages. Maybe he'd left the country under an alias. But passport logs didn't show any departures under his name, and the logistics of that theory began to strain belief. Months passed, then years. The case cooled. His family kept pushing. They printed flyers, held community vigils, pleaded for tips, but nothing surfaced. Hakan's face became one of those pictures on a bulletin board that people eventually stopped noticing. Then, in a strange twist, another case surfaced. Another man, also Turkish-American, also involved in business, also vanished under mysterious circumstances. Some speculated a pattern. Others said coincidence. No links were ever proven. Just another dead-end tunnel branching off an already dark corridor. But what lingers about Hakan Karkay's disappearance isn't just the eerie emptiness of it, it's the geography. A man disappears from suburban New Jersey, and his car turns up in one of the most isolated forest regions on the East Coast. No known motive, no signs of distress. Just a line drawn between two locations that don't explain each other. And in that way, his story joins a strange category of modern folklore, the silent road trip. People who get in cars and vanish between point A and point nowhere. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get the car back, but never the driver. Just like Hakan, Diane Capone also left without warning. She stepped out of her apartment after a phone call one winter night and was never seen again. Only this time, there wasn't even a car left behind. Diane Capone, 30. It was the 16th of January, 1978, in Jersey City, New Jersey. And the winter air had the kind of stillness that only comes before something is about to be taken. Diane Capone was 30 years old, living in a modest apartment in the Heights section of the city. She'd come back from work, changed out of her office clothes, maybe made something small for dinner. A neighbor remembered seeing her through the window around 7 p.m., phone pressed to her ear, pacing slowly, as if trying to work something out with someone on the other end of the line. And then she was gone. What we know is this. Diane received a phone call that evening. She listened, responded, and then left her apartment. She didn't bring a bag, no coat, even though it was the middle of January. She left her lights on, didn't lock the door behind her, and never returned. That's it. That's the beginning and end of the trail. No one knows who was on the other end of that call. Phone records from that time are nearly useless. No cell towers, no metadata, just a landline receiver and whatever the other voice said to get her to leave. The fact that she walked out without even grabbing her purse told investigators something chilling. She must have known and trusted whoever called. And that trust was the last thing she ever gave away. When Diane didn't show up to work the next morning, her employer called the house. No answer. Friends stopped by later that day and found the door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing was missing. No signs of a struggle. Her wallet and keys were sitting on the counter. Her coat was still on the hook. Her shoes, the ones she'd worn earlier that day, were by the door. It was as if she'd stepped out for just a moment. Only the moment never ended. Police launched a search, starting with the basics. Interviews with neighbors, co-workers, family. Diane had no enemies, no known mental health issues, no recent breakups, no unexplained debt. Her life was stable, quiet. She worked at a local insurance firm. She kept to herself, but was friendly with those she knew well. Her family described her as reliable to a fault. So what would make someone like that just disappear? Early speculation circled around an ex-boyfriend, someone she had dated briefly the year before. He was questioned but had an alibi. He claimed they hadn't spoken in months. There were no threatening letters. No bad blood anyone could find. The theory fizzled. Others thought perhaps it had something to do with work. Insurance firms can carry secrets. After all, fraud, client disputes, financial missteps. But nothing concrete ever came up. Her office computer, or rather, her typewriter, held no clues. Her desk calendar stopped on the 16th, with no unusual notes. Weeks passed, then months. The winter turned to spring. By summer, Diane Capone's case had already slipped from the front pages of the local paper. Her parents, who lived nearby in Union City, kept hope alive longer than anyone. Her father stood outside the Port Authority bus terminal every weekend for nearly a year, holding up her photo, asking passers-by if they'd seen her. Her mother called hospitals up and down the coast. Each time, she repeated the same sentence. She's 30, about 5'4", Italian-American, brown hair, brown eyes, just vanished. But no hospital had her. No morgue, no shelter, no cult, no safe house, no halfway home, no Jane Doe that matched her, no sightings, not even a single confirmed lead. It was as if the city had erased her. Jersey City, for its part, tried to move on. It's not the kind of place that stops for long. Buildings get torn down, faces change, people come and go. But there's something about a disappearance like Diane's that doesn't leave the room. She wasn't running from anything. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't say goodbye. She was there, and then she wasn't. Investigators have revisited the case over the years. Cold case units have re-examined her file. Every decade or so, someone rediscovers her name and tries to connect dots that were never drawn. Some suggest it was a targeted abduction. Others think she may have witnessed something, heard something, known, something she wasn't supposed to. But the one detail that always pulls people back to the beginning is that phone call. Someone called her. She listened. She trusted. She left. Which makes you wonder what kind of voice can get someone to step out into the winter night with nothing in her hands. What kind of voice doesn't need to convince, but simply calls? No one has ever found that voice. And Diane Capone's story has become something else entirely. A story about the space between a phone ringing and a door opening. A space Carlise Sims also stepped into 40 years old, East Orange, New Year's Day, 1981, an argument at the door, a man she left with, and then nothing. Carlise Elizabeth Sims, 40. East Orange, New Jersey. The 1st of January, 1981. A new year, fresh calendar, clean slate, the kind of morning when the world feels paused, if only briefly. People slept late. Stores stayed closed. The streets were quieter than usual, muffled by the hangover of celebration. But inside one East Orange apartment, something was already unraveling. Carlise Elizabeth Sims, age 40, had spent New Year's Eve at home. No wild parties, no big gatherings, just a quiet night. That was how she liked it. Carlise was grounded, observant, not easily shaken. She was a mother, a sister, a daughter. She'd lived her whole life in New Jersey, had a tight-knit circle, and wasn't the type to act on impulse. But that morning, New Year's Day, something unexpected happened. She had an argument with someone at her door. The details are blurry. Some reports say it was a man she knew. Others say it was someone unfamiliar. A witness described hearing raised voices, something quick and heated, but not loud enough to sound like a true fight. Carlise didn't scream. She didn't slam the door. She opened it. She left with the man. And she never came back. That was the last moment anyone saw her. The apartment itself was untouched. Nothing missing, nothing broken. Her purse, oddly enough, was gone, but that was it. She hadn't taken clothing, personal items, or anything that would suggest a planned trip. There was no note, no calendar entry, no warning to anyone she was close with. Her family reported her missing almost immediately. This wasn't like her. She wasn't one to vanish without telling someone. She had responsibilities, children to check in on, bills to pay, people depending on her. When police responded, they didn't dismiss it outright, but their tone suggested a familiar indifference. She was an adult, after all, 40 years old. Adults have the right to disappear, they said. That line again. But her family pushed back. Hard. They insisted this was different. Carlise had no history of erratic behavior. No known mental health issues. No record of running off. She had a full-time job in healthcare. She paid her rent on time. She didn't just go missing. The case was opened but quietly. The search was limited, the leads sparse. The apartment building had no security cameras, and neighbors remembered very little. The man she left with, never identified. The argument? Never clarified. No fingerprints, no blood, no obvious sign of struggle. Just the eerie simplicity of her exit. And the timing New Year's Day didn't help. The city's resources were thin. Response times lagged. The first 48 hours, those sacred hours in any missing persons case, were chewed up by holiday slowdowns and administrative backlog. By the time someone was truly focused on her disappearance, Carlise had already become a puzzle with half its pieces gone. Then came the rumors. Friends whispered that Carlise had been seeing someone new, someone who gave her pause. Not necessarily threatening, but unpredictable. Someone who didn't like being told no. But no name ever surfaced with certainty. Police questioned a few acquaintances, but no one stood out. No one confessed. No one ran. Her phone records offered little. Calls to family, to coworkers. No unknown numbers that suggested a sudden twist. If she was in trouble, it wasn't digital. It wasn't traceable. It was personal. The years stretched out. Her case slid into the backlog. Her children grew up. Her mother passed. The apartment changed tenants a dozen times. No memorials, no conclusions. Just a vacuum that sat at the table every holiday after that. For those closest to her, the worst part wasn't the fear, it was the absurdity. That someone so present, so involved, could evaporate mid-conversation, mid-morning, in her own building, with someone possibly known. That there wasn't a single camera, a single photo, a single handprint left behind. That the world didn't even notice she was gone. Carlise was more than her final moment. She was fiercely protective of her kids, meticulous about her appearance, and known for telling stories that held you in place. Her laughter had a rhythm 2 beats, then a pause, then a full-body chuckle that lit up a room. She was thoughtful, often the first to show up for someone else's crisis. And when she disappeared, she left behind not just mystery, but imbalance, the kind that never quite corrects. Occasionally, tips still come in. A woman matching her description seen in another state, a name dropped in a forum post, a distant relative who believes she's still alive, under a different name. But every lead so far has ended the same way. Nowhere. In East Orange, most people have forgotten, but her name still sits in the unsolved case files under the category of suspicious disappearance. And in quiet moments, early mornings, winter days, New Year's reflections, her absence lingers like a half-remembered song. And while Carlise vanished into silence, not everyone who goes missing leaves quietly. Because just a few towns over, nearly 2 decades later, another woman left home for a short drive. The weather was calm. Her mood was normal. She told someone she'd be right back. She wasn't. Robin D. Trevisano, 32. May 5, 1997, Neptune Township, New Jersey. A Monday afternoon that had no reason to become historic, and yet it quietly did for one family, for one woman, and for a case that still refuses to close. Robin D. Trevisano was 32 years old, blonde, petite, with a straightforward kind of confidence that made her approachable and grounded. She was the kind of person people trusted with their stories. She had a dry sense of humor, a quick wit, and a tendency to second-guess herself only after the decision had already been made. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, and someone who didn't usually do things impulsively. That morning, she left her house for what she said would be a short drive. She never came back. Robin's day had started normally. She made phone calls, chatted briefly with someone close to her, handled a few errands. There was no indication of tension, no distress, no sign that she was planning anything out of the ordinary. She wasn't packed for a trip. She hadn't withdrawn money. She hadn't left a note. She simply said she'd be back soon and drove off into nothing. Her car, a white 1994 Nissan Altima, was found a few days later in neighboring Ocean Township, parked, locked, abandoned in the parking lot of the Seaview Square Mall. It was discovered under routine circumstances, a security sweep of the lot by mall personnel. The car had been sitting there for a while, unnoticed. Inside the vehicle, everything appeared. It's normal. Her purse was gone, but otherwise the car was clean, unremarkable. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no damage to the interior. The doors were locked, the keys weren't inside, the windows were up. It was a ghost car, the kind that returns without its driver and without an explanation. Police were brought in quickly. Because of Robin's age and lack of known personal turmoil, the case was taken seriously from the start. But seriously still has its limits when there's no crime scene and no witnesses. She'd left on her own. That much was certain. But beyond that, it was all suggestion. Her family insisted immediately that this was not something she would do. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She had a young daughter. She was deeply devoted to someone she didn't go more than a few hours without calling. The idea that she'd walk away voluntarily didn't fit the version of Robin they knew. They canvassed neighborhoods, put up flyers, made calls. They searched wooded areas, checked motels, tracked rumors. The family even went as far as consulting private investigators. But nothing came back. No trace. Not a single verified sighting. Not a receipt. Not a fingerprint. Just an empty car sitting in a parking lot like a question that no one had an answer for. Speculation arrived quickly. One theory suggested she may have met someone there. Maybe for a secretive reason, a rendezvous, an errand she didn't want to explain. But that theory required assumptions Robin's friends and family rejected outright. She wasn't secretive, she wasn't reckless. And if she was meeting someone, why leave the car behind like that? Why disappear without a trace? Another theory leaned toward abduction. The mall lot was large, poorly lit in some areas, and bordered by wooded terrain. It was possible someone met her there under false pretenses. But again, if there was foul play, why no signs of it? Why no DNA, no security footage, no sounds, no struggle? Even the possibility of a voluntary disappearance, though never fully ruled out, left behind more questions than answers. If Robin wanted to disappear, she would have needed money, a plan, a place to go. She left behind all of it. Her bank accounts were untouched. Her social security number was never used again. She didn't even take clothes with her. No call, no confession, no goodbye. Over the years, her case would surface briefly, every time a body was found in New Jersey that couldn't be immediately identified. Each time, families held their breath, but it was never her. Robin's daughter grew up without answers. Her parents aged into silence, and the case grew colder. New detectives were assigned. Files were reviewed. But every angle, every theory, every hunch ran into the same impenetrable wall. She was there, and then she wasn't. In 2013, Robin's case was reclassified as an endangered missing person, which is a bureaucratic way of admitting that no one knows what happened, but everyone agrees it wasn't right. Her face appeared on digital billboards for a time, part of an initiative to reawaken old cases. It sparked a handful of calls, but none led anywhere useful. And so, she remains missing. Some vanishings feel like acts of violence. Some feel like accidents. But Robin's? Robin's feels like subtraction. As if someone quietly removed her from the equation and hoped no one would notice the missing variable. But someone did. And someone always will. Because people don't just leave their lives behind. Not without a reason. Not without a trace. And if that logic holds true, then the case of Camille Masek, another missing adult from Jersey City, gone in a similarly clean, detailless vanishing, should have been the exception. It wasn't des Camille Masek. 30. Jersey City, the 27th of January, 2008. A cold Sunday with wind bouncing off the Hudson and rattling windows like it had something to prove. At 30 years old, Kamil Masek had more good days ahead of him than behind. He had a fiancée, close friends, a job in technology, and a life that had no business getting cut short or quietly removed without anyone hearing a sound. That evening, he told his fiancée that he was going to meet up with a few friends. Nothing formal, just some plans. The kind of thing you say when you're halfway out the door and expecting to be back before it gets too late. He left the apartment, took his keys, took his phone, didn't take much else. That was the last anyone saw or heard from him. In the days that followed, his fiancée tried to reach him first with texts, then with calls, then with something closer to panic. There was no reply. His friends hadn't seen him. None of them had plans that night. Nobody knew what he was talking about. It was as if the whole reason for leaving had been made up or given to him by someone else. 4 days later, his car was found abandoned on a Jersey City street. It was parked legally, locked. Nothing unusual on the outside. No broken windows, no signs of a struggle. The vehicle was registered in his name, and everything inside belonged to him. Wallet, phone, ID. Nothing was taken, nothing was added. He had simply vanished. The police didn't call it foul play, not at first. No signs of robbery, no evidence of violence. But there also wasn't any indication that he'd left by choice. His phone was dead, but not wiped. It had no recent messages that pointed to anything alarming. No one had heard him express any desire to run away. His fiancée told detectives that Kamil had been in good spirits, no depression, no hidden behavior, no recent financial trouble, just normal. But normal doesn't just evaporate. As the investigation stretched into weeks, then months, the facts got fewer and fewer. Surveillance footage in the area was either unavailable or overwritten. No street cameras caught his car pulling in. No neighbors remembered seeing it arrive. No one remembered seeing him leave. One theory suggested he may have been lured somewhere, perhaps under false pretenses. But that theory couldn't answer the next question. Then what? Where was he taken? And how did it happen in a city with that many eyes and that little follow-up? Others speculated that Kamil may have had secrets, that the meeting with friends was code for something else, something he didn't want to tell his fiancée. But again, there was no proof. His finances were clean, his habits unchanged, his browser history uneventful. Sometimes, a person leaves a gap you can at least work with. A hint, a breadcrumb, a half-formed clue. But Kamil Masek left nothing but a location, a car on a street. The kind of clue that says, this is where it stopped, but not how or why. Years later, his name still surfaces on missing persons forums. Occasionally, someone thinks they've spotted him, someone who looks just like him in another city, another state. But none of the leads ever pan out. He never resurfaced, never called, never touched his accounts. It's as if the meeting he was heading to was real but for someone else's reasons. And just like that, his story froze in place. A modern disappearance with none of the usual explanations. No chaos, no scandal, just absence. Like the car, he left no signs of entry or exit. And for anyone who thought that vanishing without a trace was a thing of the past, Kamil's story would be one of the newer reminders. But only a few years later, another case in New Jersey would suggest something even darker. Because when Sarah Stern left her house in Neptune and her car was found on a bridge, the conclusion seemed obvious. Only it wasn't Cart. Sarah L. Stern. The 2nd of December, 2016. Neptune City, New Jersey. Sarah Stern was 19 years old, and just barely standing on the edge of adulthood. The kind of person who felt more like a work in progress than a finished portrait. She had dreams of being an artist, of moving out west, of living somewhere with more color and light and less winter. She lived in her late grandmother's house alone, after her passing, an unusual situation for someone her age, but not unheard of. She was independent, determined, a little restless. That night, she left her house and disappeared. Her car, a black, older model Oldsmobile, was found the next morning on the Route 35 bridge between Neptune and Belmar. Parked, engine off, doors locked, keys still inside. It was the kind of scene that screamed a single, tragic possibility. She jumped. That was the assumption the authorities made within the first 24 hours. But things didn't quite add up. Sarah had left her dog at home. She had packed no bag, left no note, and made plans for the following day. She had spoken to friends the night before and didn't sound distraught. No one reported anything unusual. Her bank account was untouched. Her phone went dark around the time her car was left on the bridge, but no outgoing calls or messages offered any clue. A full-scale search of the Shark River beneath the bridge was launched. Boats, divers, drones. Nothing was found. No body, no clothing, not even a shoe. Days turned into weeks. Then, the story took a sharp turn. In February 2017, two of Sarah's former classmates, Liam McAdesney and Preston Taylor, were arrested. McAdesney, it turned out, had confessed to strangling Sarah and disposing of her body with Taylor's help. The confession was caught on hidden camera during a sting operation that remains one of the more unsettling pieces of evidence in any New Jersey criminal case in recent memory. They claimed it was about money. Sarah had recently come into some inheritance. The story they told was calculated, rehearsed, and disturbingly flat. And yet, despite the confessions, despite the convictions, Sarah's body was never recovered. The ocean doesn't always give things back. For her family, justice was complicated. The case was solved, yes, but not resolved. Her remains are still missing, her memory still incomplete. And even with answers, the facts remain haunting. A friend killed her, a second friend helped, two people she trusted, two people who walked beside her in life, and then erased her. Sarah's case is often listed as a solved homicide, but emotionally, spiritually, and in every other way that matters, it's not finished. Because when someone is gone, and there's no grave, no farewell, no final place to go, there's always a sliver of unreality that lingers. You never fully feel the end. And perhaps that's what connects her story to the ones that came before. Because not every vanishing needs to be unexplained to remain unfinished. And not every mystery ends at adulthood. Some of them begin before a child even understands what the word missing means. Like William Billy, Jones III, 3 years old, playing in his yard, who turned his back for 1 second and never returned. William Billy Jones III, 3. Vineland, New Jersey, the 17th of December, 1962. It was a Monday afternoon, the week before Christmas, and the neighborhood on Taylor Avenue was dressed for the season. Lights on porches, wreaths on doors, parents stringing bulbs along the edges of rooftops. In the front yard of one small house, 3-year-old Billy Jones played with his younger sister. It was cold, but not bitter. The kind of December afternoon where the sky feels a little closer, like it's leaning in to listen. His mother stepped inside for just a moment to check on something, to grab something from the kitchen. When she came back out, Billy was gone. His sister, barely more than a toddler herself, said he'd followed a little dog down the street. No one ever saw him again. Billy's disappearance became one of the oldest and most enduring missing child cases in New Jersey history. An FBI poster was printed. Flyers went out by the thousands. Neighbors scoured the woods, the fields, the creeks. Police went door to door, over and over, asking the same questions, receiving the same blank stares. A dog? What dog? Which way did he go? What was he wearing? Blue overalls. A white shirt? A gray snowsuit, brown shoes. That description became gospel. For days, helicopters circled. Volunteers with flashlights and hope combed every possible path he could have taken. The search zone expanded, then contracted, then expanded again. But the boy who had once run through snowdrifts in his backyard seemed to have evaporated. Some believed he'd fallen into a nearby stream. Others suspected a passing car had stopped and scooped him up. But there were no witnesses, no tire tracks, no cries for help. Just a child who had existed in one breath and not the next. As the decades wore on, Billy's story became a fixture in New Jersey folklore. He was the face on the milk carton, the warning on the evening news. His photo, now digitally aged into adulthood, shows a face that never had the chance to grow into itself. His case remains open. Every year, his family still wonders what happened, whether he's out there, unaware of who he really is, whether someone out there knows the truth, but has chosen silence over conscience. And every time a new case begins, someone in law enforcement says the same thing. This could be like Billy Jones. Because when a 3-year-old vanishes into thin air, even time can't fill in the blank. And that blank would open again. This time for an 84-year-old man named Ulpiano Gomez, who left his home in Vineland 41 years later, in 2003, to buy a remote control. And was never seen again. Ulpiano Gomez, 84. The 1st of March, 2003. Vineland, New Jersey. It was a gray, soft-edged Saturday, nothing dramatic, just the kind of overcast that makes everything look faded, like someone dimmed the contrast on the entire town. Ulpiano Gomez, age 84, left his home that morning to buy a new remote control. That was the errand. That was the plan. A short trip to the store. A routine task for a man who'd lived a long life in the same city where he now quietly vanished. His family didn't worry at first. Ulpiano was independent, even at his age. He was sharp-minded, lucid, and had a routine. He didn't wander. He didn't forget things. And while 84 sounds frail on paper, in practice, he still carried himself with the kind of dignity and purpose that comes from a lifetime of self-reliance. He left on foot. It wasn't far, just a few blocks. The store was familiar, one he'd been to many times. He said goodbye, closed the door behind him, and stepped into a mystery that no one has been able to untangle since. He never made it to the store. That afternoon, when he didn't return, the family made a few calls. At first, they assumed there'd been a delay. Maybe he'd run into a friend. Maybe he'd stopped for coffee. But by early evening, the unease began to settle in. By nightfall, it was full panic. They filed a missing persons report immediately. Police responded, but cautiously. After all, this wasn't a child or a teenager. It was an elderly man. A few officers suggested he might have gotten confused or turned around. Others pointed to possible memory issues, despite the family insisting otherwise. The area was searched. Local businesses were canvassed. Flyers were distributed. The community came together. For the first few days, there was movement, volunteers, helicopters, tracking dogs. Every nearby field, alley, and wooded patch was examined. Nothing. No one remembered seeing him that day. No store employees reported speaking with him. No surveillance footage placed him anywhere after he left his home. It was as if he'd stepped into fog and never stepped back out. Theories sprouted. Some benign, some bleak. Maybe he'd fallen somewhere. Maybe he'd gotten hit by a vehicle and it had been covered up. Maybe someone had taken advantage of him. Robbery, deception, worse. But with no evidence and no trail, every explanation was just air. His family remained vocal. They worked with local Spanish-speaking communities to spread awareness. Ulpiano had roots in Puerto Rico and a wide network of family and friends in the area. He was well known, well loved, and well remembered, but still no sightings, no clues, no body. Years passed. His name faded from headlines and became a line item in missing persons databases. Occasionally, investigators would revisit the file, recheck old tips, retrace his likely route. Still nothing. He remains one of the most baffling adult missing person cases in Vineland's history, not because of how he vanished, but because of how completely the trail dissolved. And there's something especially cruel about vanishing in the middle of a routine. Because when someone leaves in a cloud of mystery, at least there's narrative tension. With Ulpiano, there's just a man going to buy a remote. A simple, forgettable errand that became unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. And just 5 years later, another man much younger would walk out of his house in Lakewood Township, New Jersey, and do the exact same thing. Disappear without a trace, with no warning and no logic. His name was Byron Melendez, and no one ever saw him again either. Byron Melendez, 22. The 1st of October, 2008. Lakewood Township, New Jersey. A weekday. Crisp autumn air. Leaves beginning to turn. 22-year-old Byron Melendez walked out of a house and into a silence that still hasn't ended. Byron wasn't a kid. He was legally an adult, yes, but 22 is still an age of becoming. The time when your life is more plan than product. He was smart, laid back, and optimistic in the way only someone that age can be. He had family in the area, friends, no known enemies, no known problems, no known reason to vanish. But he did. What we know is painfully little. Byron was last seen in Lakewood that day. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He didn't pack a bag. He didn't say goodbye. He just left, or was taken, or was met by something unexpected. No one knows. At first, it wasn't treated as an emergency. Young men go missing all the time, the logic goes. Maybe he needed space. Maybe he went to visit someone. Maybe he was just being 22. But when the hours turned into a day, and then another, and then a week, his family knew something was wrong. Byron wasn't careless. He wasn't the type to vanish without telling anyone. His phone was off. His bank account untouched. His car gone. Eventually, the car was found. Or rather, it was no longer located where it was believed to be. No one could say exactly where it had gone. His family believed he may have left the area, possibly the state. Some reports suggested he may have had ties in Pennsylvania or New York, but no one could confirm it. No flight records, no credit card use, no confirmed sightings, just a vague possibility. His disappearance never made major headlines. A young man of color going missing in a working-class town didn't exactly spark national media interest in 2008. His family did their best. Flyers, word of mouth, knocking on doors, but Byron's story began to sink beneath the surface almost as soon as it surfaced. Theories, few and far between. Maybe he left voluntarily, though that made no sense to those who knew him. Maybe he ran into trouble, though no one could point to what kind. Maybe he was planning to start over somewhere new, but then why not take money, clothes, Idaho? Some believe that whatever happened to Byron didn't begin that day, it began weeks earlier, that someone was following him, that there was pressure building from a direction he hadn't shared with anyone. But those are just shadows cast by the absence of facts. To this day, Byron Melendez remains missing. His name appears in state databases and the occasional cold case roundup, but for his family, it's not a case, it's a hole with no bottom. And just 8 years later, in the very same town, it would happen again. Another disappearance. Another adult, gone with barely a whisper. This time, it was Luisa Aguilar. And the only trace she left behind was one phone call made a week after she vanished, and then never again. Luisa Aguilar, 40. The 17th of April, 2016. Lakewood, New Jersey. A quiet Sunday in a quiet neighborhood, as unremarkable as they come. That afternoon, 40-year-old Luisa Aguilar was at home. Her family had gone out. She stayed behind. By the time they came back, she was gone. Gone as in not in the house, not in the yard, not answering her phone, but also gone in a deeper, eerier sense. Certain key belongings, her wallet, some clothes, a few personal items were missing. But her phone, strangely, had been left behind, as if whatever decision had taken her out the door had happened too fast or had come too unexpectedly to take everything she meant to. There was no sign of a struggle, no signs of distress, no note, no goodbye, just a silent subtraction. The police were called, a report was filed, but early responses leaned toward the voluntary disappearance narrative. She's an adult. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she left for a reason. Then came the phone call. Exactly 1 week later, a family member received a call from an unknown number. It was Louisa. Brief, rushed. She said she was okay, not to worry. She didn't say where she was. She didn't explain anything. She didn't call back. That was the last anyone heard from her. The number couldn't be traced. It was a burner phone or payphone, something temporary. The call was too short to track. And then, silence. Her family didn't believe she left by choice. They described her as devoted, grounded, and consistent. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't impulsive. She had no reason to run. Her job was stable. Her mental health, by all accounts, was fine. No one was waiting for her to crack. And no one expected her to vanish. They searched hospitals, checked shelters, filed reports across multiple counties, but with no credit card activity, no official ID usage, and no repeat calls, the case stalled. One phone call, one voice, and then nothing. Theories ranged from the sinister to the surreal. Maybe she was taken and later released. Maybe she fled something she couldn't talk about. Maybe she fell through some crack in the system, displaced, undocumented, unreachable. But with no follow-up and no leads, there's no way to tell. What remains is absence, the kind that follows a woman out of her house and into a story that no one can finish. And it wouldn't be the first time a young woman vanished from her apartment in New Jersey under mysterious circumstances. Because nearly 50 years earlier, that's exactly what happened to Darlene Polizzi. And just like Louisa, she left no trail. Darlene Polizzi, the 24th of April, 1967, Lodi, New Jersey. A Monday, unseasonably warm. One of those spring days when the air smells more like July than April, and everything feels a little too quiet, a little too off script. 19-year-old Darlene Polizzi lived alone in a modest apartment. She had just started carving out her adult life, working part-time, staying close to family, and trying to figure out the kind of person she wanted to become. But whatever plans she had, they ended abruptly that afternoon. Because Darlene left her apartment that day, and no one has seen her since. She wasn't the kind of person who went missing. That's what her family said, over and over. Not flighty, not unreliable, not prone to disappearing for a night, much less forever. She was practical. Steady. And although she had recently started gaining more independence, there were no signs she was pulling away from anyone. Her rent was paid, her clothes were clean, her job was stable. There was no boyfriend in the picture at the time, at least none she had mentioned. What made her disappearance even more unsettling was the complete lack of disturbance. Her apartment was left tidy. Nothing missing. Nothing overturned. Her belongings were still in place. Her purse was gone, as were the clothes she'd been wearing, but everything else, untouched. She was just gone. The police response in 1967 was predictably slow. She was an adult, they said. She probably just needed space. Maybe she'd come back in a day or two. They waited. The family waited. But Darlene didn't return. Eventually, law enforcement began taking a closer look. They interviewed neighbors, friends, co-workers, but no one had seen anything unusual. One neighbor claimed to hear a door slam around the time she was believed to have left, but in a busy apartment complex, that didn't mean much. There was no forced entry, no noise, no witnesses to anything resembling a crime. Then came the whispers, low-grade rumors that have followed the case like static ever since. There was talk of a man, not a boyfriend exactly, but someone older, someone Darlene had met briefly, a supposed neighbor, someone who didn't live there long, a man who left just after she vanished. No one could provide a full name, just a vague description, average height, dark hair, polite. Not much to go on. Over the years, more sinister theories emerged. Some believed Darlene had become the victim of a serial predator. Others suspected she had been trafficked. There were similarities between her case and other young women who vanished from the area in the late 62nd. A few investigators privately suggested the involvement of someone operating under the radar. Someone local, careful, experienced. But none of these theories were ever confirmed. No suspects named, no body found, no answers. Her family never stopped looking. Her mother, in particular, refused to let the case disappear the way her daughter had. She kept a scrapbook of every article, every flyer, every letter from the police. She grew old with Darlene frozen at 19. And with every year, the case grew colder. By the 1992nd, most of the original investigators had retired. Evidence such as it was had degraded, been misplaced, or lost entirely. Her case was rarely brought up, except as an entry in unsolved files that stretched back to an era before forensics had teeth. And still, nothing changed. Darlene's photo, sepia-toned, smiling slightly, became an emblem of an era when women could vanish without anyone really noticing for days, sometimes weeks. She was one of many, but still distinct. Her story carries the echo of every woman who lived alone and trusted the wrong knock at the door. Every young adult who slipped just outside the line of vision and fell into the permanent blind spot of law enforcement. Her name is rarely spoken outside of Lodi now, but she was here. She was real, and someone out there knows why she's not anymore. And if time teaches anything in these cases, it's that the answers don't always arrive where you expect them. Because nearly 50 years later, another woman would vanish in the same state, this time in Atlantic City, and the man closest to her would offer his own tragic punctuation. But the woman? Sapphire T. Wiggins? She remains missing. Sapphire T. Wiggins, 23. The 15th of September, 2014. Atlantic City, New Jersey. The boardwalk lights still blinking, the casinos still humming, tourists still throwing away coins on blinking machines. Amid it all, 2 3-year-old Sapphire Wiggins disappeared. Sapphire was a mother, a sister, a daughter. She was also an Atlantic City native, born and raised in a place where highs are high and lows fall fast and quiet. She had grown up in the shadow of the glittering skyline, and she understood the city's contradictions. She worked hard. She loved her child deeply. And she'd been trying to create stability in a place that didn't always reward it. That afternoon, she vanished, leaving behind her car, her purse, her child. That last part is what made everyone stop. It's one thing for an adult to go missing. It's another for a devoted mother to leave without her baby, especially when nothing else was taken. No clothes, no cash, no IDs, no phone. Nothing to suggest she'd left of her own free will. The initial search was chaotic. Atlantic City is a maze of hotels, alleyways, surveillance cameras, and anonymity. People come and go by the thousands every day. Tracking a single person, especially after the first 24 hours, is a challenge even under ideal circumstances. But this wasn't ideal. Police began their investigation, focusing first on her personal relationships. That's when they turned their attention to her boyfriend. Within days, he had taken his own life. He left no note, No confession, just absence layered over absence. Investigators found this deeply suspicious, but inconclusive. Without a confession, without evidence tying him directly to her disappearance, they couldn't confirm what many suspected, that he had taken her life and chosen silence over consequences. The timeline offered no clarity. No camera footage placed him at any definitive location. No witnesses had seen them together that day. There was no blood, no weapon, no clothing, no signs of struggle. Just circumstantial suspicion and then a dead end. Her family was devastated, not just by her disappearance, but by the collapse of the only person who might have had answers. The one person who may have known where she was, what had happened, had ensured he would never be questioned. And Sapphire's case, just like her life, hung in limbo. As time passed, the case grew colder. Leads slowed. The coverage thinned. The assumption, quietly and unofficially, was that she had been killed, but no one could prove it. Her daughter is growing up now, without her mother, and without a story that makes sense, without a body, without a reason. Some missing persons cases are riddled with theories, others with evidence. Sapphire's is filled with silence. Just a void where a woman used to be, and a city that kept spinning as if nothing had happened. But just as the dust begins to settle around one mystery, another one pulls it back up. This time, it happened on the 4th of July, the most visible, patriotic, supposed to be safe day on the calendar. And Teresa Kawash? She didn't just go missing, she disappeared with her car. And no one's found either of them since. Teresa A. Kawash, 37. The 4th of July, 1982. Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. Independence Day. Fireworks waiting in trunks, flags on lawns. Everything loud and celebratory. But inside one quiet suburban house, 3 7-year-old Teresa Kawash spent the morning alone. Later that evening, she was gone. No note, no calls, no plans left behind. Her car, a white 2-door sedan, was missing. She was last seen that morning at home. After that, nothing. She didn't show up to the family barbecue. She didn't answer the phone. She didn't return that night, or any night after. Police were contacted. A missing persons case was opened. Early theories leaned towards something voluntary. An adult woman leaving on her own. A stressful life, maybe. A quiet exit. But nothing in her recent behavior supported that. Teresa was calm. She had a job, a family. She hadn't expressed anxiety or distress. There was no catalyst anyone could point to. No argument, no breakdown. And her car, perhaps the most glaring detail, was never found. Not abandoned, not stripped, not dumped, not registered in another state. It simply vanished. The trail ended before it began. Investigators questioned friends, family, co-workers. No one had any idea where she would go. No secret boyfriends, no new jobs, no off-the-grid ambitions. She was content, or so it seemed. Leads dried up quickly. There was no crime scene, no financial activity, no digital trail to follow, because 1982 didn't offer any. And decades later, her file remains one of the most stubbornly unsolved cases in the state. Teresa vanished on the most visible day of the year, but no one saw a thing. And just 3 years earlier, a 7-year-old girl would vanish under even stranger circumstances. No car, no camera, no fireworks. Just an ordinary exit that turned into a permanent goodbye. Lorraine Rhea Herbster, 17. The 9th of March, 1979, West Hampton Township, New Jersey. 17-year-old Lorraine Rhea Herbster left her home that Friday morning and never came back. No dramatic farewell. No ominous lead-up. Just one of those simple, everyday disappearances that don't seem important until it becomes clear that it's not temporary. Lorraine wasn't planning anything unusual that day. She had left the house like it was any other morning. She'd spoken to her mother. She had plans later that week. Her room was tidy. Her school books were stacked by the bed. There was no sign of distress, no indication she had a reason or desire to disappear. But she did. And in the decades since, the exact moment where her timeline ends has never been found. She was last seen leaving home, dressed casually, with no luggage, no extra money, no dramatic signs of departure. Not a single witness reported anything suspicious. No car was seen picking her up. No argument was heard before she left. Just footsteps heading into silence. At first, police treated the case as a likely runaway. 17 is that fragile in-between. Age old enough to be called independent, young enough to be dismissed as impulsive. But Lorraine's family didn't believe it. She was reliable. She had strong ties to home. She hadn't expressed any desire to leave, and nothing in her behavior leading up to that day suggested she would. Still, the case didn't generate urgency. No national spotlight, no helicopters. Just a missing person report quietly filed in Burlington County, and a family suddenly dealing with a crisis the world treated like an afterthought. As the days passed, the possibilities began stacking up. Maybe she'd gotten into a stranger's car. Maybe someone she knew convinced her to leave with them. Maybe she was somewhere nearby, confused, hurt, afraid to come home. But none of those maybes led anywhere. There were no confirmed sightings, no letters, no phone calls, no arrests. Just a blank space stretching across decades. The absence of a crime scene complicated things. There was no evidence to build a narrative around. No personal item found discarded on the road. No neighbors who saw her leave in a rush. No known associates with shady backgrounds. Just a door closing behind her and nothing after. Her family kept searching. For years, they chased every possible lead. A girl matching her description seen in Trenton. A woman in Pennsylvania who called herself Lorraine. A Jane Doe found out of state. But every tip unraveled. Every theory collapsed under scrutiny. By the 1992nd, her name had faded into the background of the state's many unsolved missing person cases. Occasionally, an anniversary article would bring her back into public consciousness, but only briefly. Then she would vanish again, this time from the headlines. Her case has no known suspects, no working theory, no resolution. It remains in the public record like a bookmark in a story no one remembers how to read. What's unsettling is how unremarkable it all seems. She simply left home and didn't come back. There was no flashpoint, no dramatic final moment. And that ordinariness has kept the case shrouded in vagueness ever since. But some say that kind of disappearance isn't the quietest, it's the loudest, because it asks a question that no one has answered. How does a teenage girl just disappear between her front door and her future? And how is it that she shares this kind of vanishing with others before and after her, like a businessman named Christopher Key? Oh, who also left home, also missed a meeting, and also left no trail behind. The difference? Christopher's story starts with a minivan, a schedule, and a silence that corporate suits don't usually disappear into. Christopher Key. Oh, 34. The 21st of October, 2001. West New York, New Jersey. A brisk Sunday, barely a month after 9/11, when the entire region was still jittery with tension. The skyline across the river had changed, the mood in the streets had shifted, and in the middle of all this, 4-year-old Christopher Key, oh, a successful businessman, missed a meeting. That alone was strange. He was never late, never careless. He ran his own company, a tech and telecom venture, and had a reputation for being precise, organized, driven. He wasn't flaky. He didn't ghost clients. And yet, that day, he simply didn't show up. No call, no excuse, no follow-up. He was last seen leaving his home in West New York in his gold Chrysler minivan. He was expected at a meeting in Fort Lee, a drive that should have taken no more than 20 minutes. But he never arrived. And the minivan? That took longer to find. It was discovered a few days later abandoned, parked neatly on a residential street, doors locked. Nothing inside seemed disturbed. The vehicle showed no signs of damage, no forced entry, no signs of distress. It was as if Christopher had parked it, walked away, and forgotten to return. But that wasn't like him. Police launched a full investigation. They combed through his phone records, interviewed friends, business partners, family members. No red flags, no business disputes that would warrant disappearing. No relationship issues, no debts. His financials were clean. His travel records showed nothing suspicious. His passport hadn't been used. His bank accounts sat untouched. In the days leading up to his disappearance, Christopher had shown no signs of anxiety, no withdrawal. He was actively planning future projects. He had meetings scheduled, trips mapped out. Nothing suggested a man planning an exit from his own life. Some theorized he might have suffered a medical emergency, gotten confused, walked away, collapsed somewhere. But that didn't explain the minivan. If something sudden had happened, where was the body? The wallet? The phone? And how had no one seen anything in broad daylight? Others floated darker theories. Maybe he'd been lured into something, an investment that wasn't what it seemed. Maybe he'd crossed someone in business. Maybe someone else had been in that van, and Christopher had never made it out. But without evidence, the possibilities collapsed under their own weight. His family put up flyers, issued press releases, appeared on local news. But the leads dried up. Quickly. No sightings, no messages, no clues. No one could even prove he'd made it to Fort Lee. It was as if the road swallowed him. To this day, Christopher's name remains on the missing persons list. His minivan is long gone. His company dissolved. His clients moved on. But his story hangs in the space between control and chaos, the kind of vanishing that makes you wonder how much of our routines are just illusions of safety. And it wouldn't be the last time someone walked away from a place they trusted and never returned. Because 8 years later, a woman named Julia Madsen would leave her summer home near the shore and never be seen again. Julia Madsen, 72. The 25th of June, 2009. South Seaside Park, New Jersey. A beach town waking into summer, with rental homes filling up and boardwalk arcades humming to life. Julia Madsen, 72 years old, had a summer place there, a modest home she used for relaxation, reading, and watching the ocean shift moods. That morning, she was there. By that afternoon, she wasn't. She was last seen by neighbors, moving around the house, tending to her garden, preparing for an early dinner. Nothing strange, no signs of distress, no hints she was planning anything unusual. She was expected to meet a friend that evening. She didn't show. And when they came looking for her, the house was unlocked. Her purse was inside, her phone, her keys, her medication, everything, all in place, except Julia. There was no sign of forced entry, no indication of a struggle, nothing stolen. Her car sat in the driveway. Her favorite coffee cup was on the kitchen counter. One burner on the stove had been left slightly warm. The police arrived quickly. A missing elderly woman alone in a summer home triggered alarm bells, especially with everything she owned left behind. They searched the neighborhood, questioned neighbors, combed the beach. Dogs, helicopters, boats, but no one had seen her leave. No one saw her enter another car. No one saw her at all. Some thought maybe she'd wandered. Maybe a moment of disorientation led her into the woods or the dunes or the surf. But the area was searched thoroughly multiple times. No clothing, no body, no footprints. Nothing. Others suspected foul play, but with no signs of entry, no motive, and no suspects. That theory also floated without anchors. Over time, Julia's disappearance faded from the news cycle. A woman vanishes quietly in a beach town, and the waves keep moving. But her family never accepted the silence. They still visit the house each summer. They still check the mailbox. They still keep the lights on. Because sometimes, vanishing doesn't begin with drama. It begins with an ordinary Thursday. A quiet stove. A chair pulled back from the table. And no one sitting in it. And the next person who would vanish? An outdoorsman. An experienced traveler. Someone who should have been able to survive anything. But David Scott Abramovitz left for a trip in 2001 and never came back. David Scott Abramovitz, 27. The 7th of September, 2001. Morristown, New Jersey. Just days before the world would tilt on its axis, 7-year-old David Scott Abramovitz left for a solo outdoor trip, one he'd carefully planned, thoroughly prepared for, and never returned from. He wasn't your average weekend hiker. David was experienced, a serious outdoorsman, not reckless, not naive. He knew how to read a map, how to handle gear, how to adjust to the unexpected. His family said he found peace in the wilderness. It wasn't an escape, it was a rhythm, something he did when life felt too static. He'd spoken with family before the trip. He'd said where he was going, roughly northern New Jersey, close to the Appalachian Trail, not far from the Delaware Water Gap. It wasn't his first time in the area. He was familiar with the terrain. He promised he'd be back in a few days, and then nothing. When David missed his return date, no one panicked immediately. He was known to extend trips by a day or two if the weather held, or the trail offered more than expected. But by day 4, the silence felt heavier. His family called around, checked trail registers, contacted park services. Nothing. That's when search teams were deployed. The woods were combed by local authorities, volunteer hikers, rangers, even helicopters. His car was found at a trailhead locked, undisturbed, parked where he'd planned to leave it. Inside, his street clothes, a half-empty water bottle, and a detailed route outline scribbled on a notepad. The problem? He wasn't on that route. David had apparently veered off path or hadn't started hiking at all. Some rangers speculated he may have decided to explore a less maintained trail or attempt a new loop. Others believed he never got far from the parking lot. Either way, the woods gave back nothing. No gear, no campfire, no sleeping bag, no signs of an animal encounter or accident. He had carried a first aid kit, a GPS unit, a compass, food rations. Everything pointed to a man who should have been able to survive a few days off-grid. But David never sent a signal. No SOS, no flare, no last text. His phone, believed to have been turned off or left in the car, offered no pings. That made search and rescue operations even harder. The forest was expansive, and the ground conditions varied wildly. Dense underbrush, cliffs, hidden creeks, and all they had to work with was absence. Friends were adamant. David wasn't someone who got lost. If he'd been injured, he would have left a marker. If he'd fallen ill, he would have known how to send for help. And if he'd wanted to disappear, he wouldn't have left his car in plain sight, parked neatly next to a trail he knew would be watched. The FBI briefly got involved, mostly because of the timing his disappearance occurred, just days before 9/11's. There were no connections, of course, but the country's attention quickly shifted and David's case fell out of the spotlight. To this day, he remains missing. His status is officially classified as lost, injured, missing. The implication is accidental death. A hiker who miscalculated, slipped, got caught in weather or terrain, but that classification is more procedural than conclusive, because no one ever found him. And in the absence of evidence, even the outdoors become suspicious. David Scott Abramovitz went into the woods with preparation, purpose, and skill, and didn't come back. And the pattern of missing adults with zero known reason for vanishing didn't stop there. Because just 2 years later, A woman in Freehold would vanish from her apartment, leaving behind signs of violence and no body. Her name was Diana Moreno Acevedo, and her story remains just as unfinished. Diana Moreno Acevedo, 45. The 20th of February, 2003, Freehold, New Jersey. A cold, dry Thursday, the kind of day that dulls sound and slows time. 45-year-old Diana Moreno Acevedo was supposed to be home that afternoon, but something, or someone, rewrote that script. She lived alone in an apartment complex. She worked hard, stayed to herself, and kept her life mostly offline and under the radar. Friends described her as thoughtful, soft-spoken, and private. She didn't make enemies. She didn't create drama. But on that Thursday, everything changed. She didn't show up for work. That wasn't like her. Calls went unanswered. Friends and coworkers tried to reach her. After a full day of silence, one of them called the building superintendent. They went to her apartment. What they found was unsettling. The front door was locked, but the inside told a different story. Furniture was out of place. Items had been knocked over. There were signs of a struggle, though law enforcement has never publicly detailed exactly what. Some sources said the scene suggested someone had left in a hurry. Others said it looked like someone had been taken. But Diana was gone. Her purse was still there. Her phone. Her shoes. Nothing that suggested a planned exit. No note. No bags packed. And nothing was stolen. It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a burglary gone wrong. It was something else. Police began investigating quickly. Her family was adamant she hadn't left by choice. They believed she had been taken, possibly murdered. They suspected someone she knew, maybe a former acquaintance or someone from work. But no suspect was ever named, no confession, no arrest. And most crucially, no body. That single fact kept the case from moving into the category of homicide. Officially, without a body, it remained a missing person case, an open wound with no way to stitch it shut. In the months that followed, police followed leads. They interviewed people from her life, searched local areas, checked phone records. Nothing. There were no financial transactions, no sightings, no tips that went anywhere. Just an apartment left in disarray and a woman no one could find. Her family kept hope alive as long as they could, but over time, that hope shifted into something colder, less about miracles, more about closure. They didn't expect Diana to walk back through the door. They just wanted to know where she was, what happened, who had taken her, and why. But those questions have never been answered. Her case remains open. Her apartment was eventually re-rented. Her belongings packed away. Her name added to the long, grim list of New Jersey's unresolved vanishings. And it's not just the lack of answers, it's the proximity to everyday life that makes it worse. This wasn't a remote trail or a lawless backroad. This was her own apartment, in a residential complex, in a town full of people. A place where doors lock, neighbors nod hello, and no one expects someone to vanish mid-afternoon. But Diana did. And just as investigators began to file her case into the colder end of the stack, another one surfaced from decades earlier. Another adult who left for a business meeting and never arrived. His name was Nicholas James Masciucci, and he left behind a car, but not a trace. Nicholas James Masciucci, 60. The 18th of September, 1974, Kearney, New Jersey. Nicholas James Masciucci was 60 years old, a sharp, seasoned businessman who knew how to handle himself. That Wednesday morning, he got into his car to head to a scheduled meeting. He dressed well. He drove a dark-colored Lincoln. He told his wife he'd be home in a few hours. He was never seen again. This wasn't a man who lived recklessly. Masciucci was a businessman with deep roots in the state. He dealt in real estate, development, and finance. He had friends in high places and, according to some, in low ones, too. He left his house, headed for a meeting in the greater Newark area, and then nothing. When he didn't return home that night, his wife became concerned. It wasn't like him. He always called, always stuck to a schedule. The next day, she contacted police. At first, officers suspected car trouble, maybe an accident, but his vehicle hadn't turned up at any local impound lots or hospitals. There was no crash, no reports, no sightings. His car was eventually found, parked, empty. No signs of violence, no signs of anything really. It was clean, nothing out of place, except the man who'd been driving it. What followed was a strangely muted investigation. Masucci had some influence in the area. There were whispers, quiet ones, that he may have been involved in business dealings that weren't entirely above board. That perhaps he'd made a deal someone wanted undone. But nothing was ever proven. No motive surfaced. No suspects named. It was like he'd simply been erased. His family pushed for answers, but the longer the case remained open, the more resistance they encountered. Files misplaced, phone calls not returned, investigators reassigned. To this day, no one knows what happened. A man leaves for a meeting, doesn't return, and the system shrugs. And just like that, his story joined a long list of disappearances that start in daylight and end in silence. But decades later, another child would vanish, one even younger than most on this list. Just 13 years old. A phone call. A summer evening in Patterson. And then, Michaela Shugel Martinez was gone. Michaela Shugel Martinez, 13. The 22nd of July, 2000, Patterson, New Jersey. A humid summer Saturday, sticky, with still air and cigarette smoke. The kind of day where the neighborhood kids are out too late, the fans are never strong enough, and the city doesn't sleep so much as lie in wait. 13-year-old Michaela Shugel Martinez was at home that evening when the phone rang. She answered, and within minutes, she was gone. The details that followed were few and oddly quiet. No shouting. No sudden rush out the door. Michaela, who had been home with her family, left without taking any of her things. No bag, no purse, no overnight clothes, no money. Just stepped out after the call. A calm exit. A final one. She was never seen again. Her family reported her missing the same night. They knew something was wrong immediately. Michaela didn't run off. She wasn't that kind of kid. She had a protective streak, especially toward her younger siblings, and had a close, almost telepathic bond with her mother. She didn't vanish on a whim. And if she were going somewhere, she would have said something. She would have packed. She would have come back. But she didn't. The investigation began with that one phone call. Who was on the other end? A friend? A stranger? A name she recognized? The family told police they didn't know. There were no threats. No build-up, no history of grooming, nothing that made sense in retrospect. The phone, a landline, had no caller ID. This was 2000, and technology hadn't caught up to paranoia yet. Police worked the usual steps. They interviewed family, friends, classmates. They checked hospitals, shelters, known trouble spots. But Michaela had simply vanished into the evening air. No one saw her leave. No one reported seeing her around town, and after that call, there were no other communications. She didn't take a phone with her. She had no credit cards to track, no vehicle, no digital presence that could offer clues. The theory that emerged unspoken but assumed was abduction. Lured, maybe, by someone who had studied her, knew when she'd be home, knew what to say, and once she stepped outside, it was over. The longer the silence lasted, the harder it became to convince the public this was still urgent. She was 13. She was Latina. She was from Patterson. And the system had a track record of prioritizing certain kinds of disappearances over others. The press coverage was minimal. Her photo appeared in local papers, on community flyers, in school newsletters, but the case never caught fire in the public imagination. It stayed quiet, low level, lingering. Her family never stopped pushing. They kept her photo visible. They followed up with police, year after year. They remembered her birthday, kept her room as it was, and waited for the phone to ring again. It never did. Miss Hala's story lives on in the absence it created. Not a high-profile mystery, not a sensational tragedy, but a long, slow ache. A missing girl who stepped outside after a phone call and then never returned. And a city that kept moving, as if nothing had happened. But it had. And it would happen again, just 10 years earlier, to another young woman in Patterson. Her name was Pamela Marie Johnson. And she, too, walked out one summer day and disappeared into silence. Pamela Marie Johnson, 21. The 1st of June, 1990, Patterson, New Jersey. Summer had just begun, and with it came all the typical noise of the city sirens in the background, music from cracked car speakers, the hum of life moving too fast. But somewhere in the middle of that noise, 21-year-old Pamela Marie Johnson walked out of wherever she was and was never heard from again. No one can say exactly where she was last seen. Some reports say she left home, others say she left a friend's place. But the common thread is this: she left on foot, didn't take anything with her, and never came back. She wasn't in trouble. She had no history of running away, no fights with family, no suspicious relationships anyone knew about. She simply stepped out, unannounced, and dissolved into a story that never wrote its second chapter. Her disappearance was slow to gain traction. By the time police opened a file, days had passed. Tips were few. Leads were vague. No one came forward with anything solid. And Pamela, like so many others, slipped into that frustrating category of just gone. Her family was devastated. Her mother begged the police to look harder. Her father canvassed neighborhoods on foot. Friends posted flyers. But every effort returned the same answer: silence. The lack of detail has always been the hardest part. With no sighting, no location, no known reason, there's no narrative to work with. It's not that there's a puzzle with missing pieces, it's that there was never a puzzle to begin with. And yet, everyone close to Pamela insists that this wasn't a case of someone choosing to leave. She had plans. She was close to her siblings. She didn't vanish. Something happened. But that something has never been defined. Her name is still on state registries. Her photo, grainy and fading, still appears in missing persons databases. Occasionally, someone will claim they saw her or someone like her, but those tips never go anywhere. Every maybe ends with no. 35 years later, her case remains open. But as with all long-term disappearances, what eventually fades isn't the pain, it's the attention. And just when you think you've exhausted every way a person can vanish, another name pops up. This time, it's a woman from Montvale. She left her grandmother's house, drove toward the coast, and was never seen again. Her name was Megan Elizabeth McCallum. Megan Elizabeth McCallum, 30. The 11th of March, 2015, Montvale, New Jersey. Megan Elizabeth McCallum, 30 years old, packed a few items into her silver 1998 Chrysler Cirrus, gave her grandmother a hug, and drove away. The next time her car was seen, it was parked near the ocean in Long Branch, abandoned. The next time Megan was seen, she had been staying with her grandmother in Montvale, trying to reset her life. The past few months had been difficult: depression, some personal struggles, but nothing alarming. Her family said she was in recovery, finding her balance again. She was writing in her journal. She was making plans. She had hope. That morning, she told her grandmother she was going out for a bit. Nothing strange, nothing final, just a drive. But she never returned. Her car was found days later, parked in a lot near the boardwalk in Long Branch. locked, empty. Inside were her journal, her keys, and her medications. Her purse was gone. Her phone was powered off. The ocean was quiet, the parking lot wide and indifferent. Police searched the area. Drones, K-9 units, foot patrols. The assumption, unspoken but heavy, was that she'd walked into the ocean. But no evidence supported that. No witnesses, no cameras. No one remembered seeing her there. And the surf never gave anything back. Her journal entries were cryptic, emotional, yes, but not alarming. No final notes, no goodbye letters, just the voice of someone still working things out. Her family refused to accept that she simply vanished into the sea. They suspected foul play. Maybe she met someone. Maybe someone followed her. Maybe the car being parked at the ocean was meant to suggest a story that wasn't real. But no suspects were ever named. No witnesses came forward, and Mahan's file slowly began to chill. In the years since, her family has become her voice. They've created websites, distributed posters, spoken to the media. They've pleaded with law enforcement to keep the case active. But still nothing. No confirmed sightings. No financial activity. No new leads. Just a car by the ocean, and a woman who never came back. Her name still echoes in missing person circles, proof that even in the age of smartphones and surveillance, people still disappear the old-fashioned way. And the next person to vanish? He borrowed a car, drove from Brooklyn, and his vehicle turned up, crashed, abandoned keys still in it, wallet untouched. William Gu was 22 years old, and what happened to him remains as baffling as ever. William Gu, 22. The 7th of March, 2013. Brooklyn, New York, but with strong ties to Perth Amboy, New Jersey. William Gu was 22 years old, quiet, dependable, and sharply intelligent. The kind of young man people often underestimate until something goes wrong and everyone starts noticing how strange it is that someone so ordinary could just vanish. That evening, William borrowed a friend's silver Lexus. He didn't say much about where he was going, just that he needed to make a quick drive. It wasn't unusual. William was trusted, calm, not the kind of person you'd worry about the moment he left your sight. But when the hours dragged on and he didn't answer his phone, concern began to spread. The next morning, the Lexus was found abandoned at the Somerset Diner in central New Jersey. It had crashed. The details are odd. The vehicle wasn't totaled, but it had clearly gone off the road before being left behind. The engine was still in working order. The doors were locked. And inside, William's wallet. His phone, his ID, all sitting there like he'd be right back. But he wasn't. No one saw him at the diner. No staff remembered a man matching his description. No security footage placed him inside. His digital footprint ended the moment the car did. And just like that, William disappeared. Law enforcement started with the basics. Interviews with friends, phone records, text logs. They talked to the person who lent him the Lexus. They looked into his financials. Nothing suspicious. No unusual withdrawals. No cryptic messages. No indication that William had been planning to disappear. Family and friends insisted there was no reason for him to run. He had no known enemies, no mounting pressure, no mental health issues that anyone was aware of. He wasn't reckless. He didn't party. He wasn't involved in anything dangerous. And yet, gone. There are two competing theories. The first, he crashed, became disoriented, wandered off into the woods surrounding the diner, and suffered some kind of accident. This theory has been heavily searched literally. K-9 teams, drones, volunteer groups combed the area repeatedly. Nothing was found. No clothes, no footprints, no trace. The second theory, someone else was involved. That's the theory that lingers like smoke. Maybe someone else was in the car. Maybe William never made it to the diner on his own. Maybe the crash was staged, or worse, abrupt and violent in a way the vehicle damage couldn't fully explain. Maybe someone forced him out, or picked him up afterward, or lured him away before anyone noticed. But that's all speculation. Without surveillance footage and without physical evidence, there's no narrative that holds, just the silence of an empty car and the eerie stillness of an unanswered question. His phone, despite being found in the vehicle, offered no clues. It had been powered off, not wiped, just dormant. To this day, William Gu's case remains unsolved. A smart young man borrows a Lexus, drives out of Brooklyn, crashes at a New Jersey diner, and disappears with no warning and no trail. And just like that, he joins the long list of disappearances that feel more like disconnections, like someone pulled the plug mid-sentence. And if that mystery wasn't fresh enough, the next one is almost too fresh. Because it happened in 2025. A man named Luis A. Lopez, just 28 years old, from Westfield. And so far, no one knows anything except that he's gone. Luis A. Lopez, 28. The 4th of July, 2025, Westfield, New Jersey. Independence Day, again, a date that keeps returning in this series like a cruel bookmark. Luis A. Lopez was 28 years old. No red flags. No pending charges, no enemies, no declared plans to disappear. But now, he's missing. And barely anyone knows why. What makes this case so different, so unsettling, is how little information is available. Not just to the public, but seemingly to anyone. The NAMUS listing is recent, sparse, no narrative yet. Just a name, an age, a date. No location details. No last known sighting. No confirmed destination. No vehicle information. No clothing description. It's almost like the file itself is a ghost. But here's what we do know. Luis was last seen on the 4th of July. That much is confirmed. His family filed a missing persons report shortly after the holiday. The timeline between when he was last seen and when the report was made is narrow, within 24 to 48 hours. That's rare. Most disappearances stretch a little first, but in this case, the alarm went up fast. Why? Possibly because Luis was in close contact with family. Possibly because he never went more than a few hours without checking in. Possibly because something happened that day, something too quiet to leave behind evidence, but too loud to go unnoticed by the people who knew him best. Search efforts are still fresh. Law enforcement hasn't released many details, and in some ways, that makes the case more disturbing than the older ones. Because here we are in 2025, with GPS tracking, surveillance cameras on every street corner, social media, AI facial recognition, data scrapes, phone logs, and yet Luis A. Lopez stepped out of frame and hasn't returned. That's not supposed to happen anymore. The illusion we all share is that technology has made mystery impossible, that we live in a panopticon of constant visibility, that if you vanish today, it must be by choice or by design. But Luis's disappearance is neither confirmed voluntary nor confirmed criminal. It just is, unexplained, ongoing, open. The NAMUS listing is recent enough that leads may still develop, but what's chilling is how familiar this now feels. A young man, in a stable life, in a quiet town, goes missing on a holiday, and nobody saw it happen. The 4th of July has now marked the disappearance of not one but two people on this list. The fireworks go off, the flags wave, and behind closed doors, someone quietly fades out of view. Which brings us full circle. From children on playgrounds to businessmen in suits, from phone calls at dusk to parked cars in broad daylight, New Jersey has become a landscape of stories half told, endings postponed indefinitely. But the real mystery? It's not how people vanish. It's how the world keeps moving like they never did.